oversaw the balloting. Well, lawmakers at the ongoing NPC annual session agreed that the constitutional revisions are of historic significance for ensuring prosperity and lasting security for both the party and the country. And President Xi Jinping said that revising parts of the Constitution is a major decision made by the CPC Central Committee from the overall and strategic height of upholding and developing socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new era. Well, that was the first amendment to the country's fundamental law in 14 years. And very soon, the chairman and vice chair of the Legislative Affairs Commission of the NPC Standing Committee will give a press conference on the amendments of the Constitution itself. We're doing live coverage on that. And join me here in the studio to talk about this is, of course, Professor Wang Chengguang, Professor of Law from Tsinghua University. Professor, thanks for joining us. And before that, let's try to cross over to our reporter Han Peng, who is now standing by at the Great Hall of the People. Well, Han Peng, well, China's constitution has just been amended. This is the first time since 1982. Tell us more about the amendment itself and what the people's deputies have been saying, and they're casting their ballots.
Now this room has been packed by reporters from home and abroad, and it's one of the most highly anticipated press conferences throughout this year's 2 sessions. And actually, just now when we were waiting outside this room, we were talking to some of the deputies, the legislators who just came out from the voting. And the deputies that we interviewed spoke to us, and they say that they agree and they support this year's constitutional amendments. They say that China does not have to keep comparing itself to the Western way of governance, but rather the country has always been exploring its own path of development. And over the past few decades, the exploration has proved to be a quite successful one, because no country so far, except China, has achieved that it has raised the country's status from a poorly industrialized country to the world's second largest economy in just a few decades. And they believe that under the new constitution, the newly amended constitution, the country will keep delivering some good results for not only its own economic development, but also for the people, not only in China, but also across the world. And just one more information I need to add. The director, Chunyao, is the legislative affairs, is the director of the Legislative Affairs Commission of the NPC Standing Committee, and that is the department which is leading the drafting of the constitutional amendment of this year. And we're expecting to hear more thoughts about why this department is doing this, and some of the expertise and some of the rationale why this constitutional amendment is so important to China and also probably to the world. Oh, yeah.
And another major change, of course, is to establish the National Supervisory Commission. Tell us more about that, and how is that included in the new constitutional amendment?
Well, of course, if we look at it, actually among the 21 changes in the constitutional amendment, 11 of them are actually focused on this one issue, which is about building up the supervisory body for the government. We talked to some of the deputies, and they say that this is highly important because over the past 5 years, after President Xi Jinping took office, at least 1 million officials have been punished for violating either the party discipline or the laws. Some of them are having serious corruption problems, and they've been punished and taken into prison. But they say that it's always important to have some preemptive strikes and also preemptive scrutiny on the officials instead of just punishing them after that they have already abused the power or stolen people's public money or taken bribery from the illegal business persons. And that is why they believe it's important to have a special department in the government to really set up and really do some transparent investigation and transparent scrutiny on officials on the use of public power. And that is why they are looking forward that this new supervisory body in the Chinese government will help achieve that and make the anti-corruption campaign more institutionalized.
All right. Thank you so much, Han Peng, for your reporting from inside the Great Hall of the People, and we look forward to that presser from the NPC. And to talk about this, we have, as we said, Mr. Wang Chengguang, professor from Tsinghua University School of Law, and also Mr. Edward Lehman, managing director at Lehman Lee & Xu. So I want First, Edward, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
You must have been listening to what has been happening at the MPC. China has just passed an amendment to its constitution. It included several parts. First of all, what do you make of this amendment and the passage by the MPC deputies?
You know, as a longtime China watcher with regards to laws, policies, and regulations, I mean, I think that this is in keeping with the trajectory that's been going on since the last change in 2004, which is trying to increase stability and long-term growth, which is the eventual goal or the goals of the party and the goals of the National People's Congress.
Why would that do that?
Well, I think what was just mentioned was the National Supervisory Commission, and the National Supervisory Commission is going to, in my mind, is going to actually meld together what's already been happening with the Central Commission on Inspection and Discipline, but you know they're going to be co-officing in these places.
Yep.
They've had these rollout in Beijing and Zhejiang and Shanxi so far, and now they're looking to do it across the nation. It's been successful, but that's the bridging, and this is what I think it's difficult for Western audiences to understand. Francisco, who was here before under the civil law jurisdiction, it's easier to understand because those laws are closer together. People from my country, from the United States, I think get a bit confused as one vote, and they think it's all predisposed. But this has actually been by consensus. It's actually been telegraphed to everybody, so to speak, and I mean in a very long and drawn-out way. Even today, with 35 scrutineers taking a look, or it was yesterday, looking at these draft amendments before everything went through. So it isn't. There's this idea that everything is sort of rubber stamped, but it's actually been done by consensus and thought processes.
But I want to pin you down on the argument that you say this is a decision by consensus, but why it is better ensuring prosperity, as President Xi said itself, prosperity of the nation and security of the party and the nation. Why it can deliver on that goal?
Yeah, I think that it's actually delivering by reaching out an olive branch to meld together, like I said, the laws, policies, and regulations through law. So you're taking it not only with the party, but also the responsibility of the law. Because over the time that I've been here, for example, the Constitution has not necessarily been emphasized. Now it's been re-emphasized. It was, you know, in 1982. It's a completely different situation from 1982 when all these. You know, and then there's been a number of amendments since that time. So I think that this is, it's a, you know, it has to be worn kind of like a loose garment. That's the way that it is. It's got to be strong enough that you're covering all things that are important, I think, in, you know, from the public, you know, as far as protection is concerned. But it also has to be maneuverable enough under this system in order to get justice done. So
I want to talk a little bit about the role of the Constitution in this country. As Edward just mentioned, there is more talk about Constitution. For example, from today on, the top leaders will swear to the Constitution to be in place. Why there is so much emphasis on the Constitution's role in the public narrative in China now?
Well, rule of law requires, first of all, rule by the Constitution. So if there is no Constitution enforcement or implementation, and making the Constitution rather empty or hanging on the wall, it is hardly a country by or of rule of law. So therefore, one of the big commitment or firm commitment of the party and also the government is to make the government and all the organizations under the Constitution and the law. So therefore, constitutional status has been upgraded, and also importance, significance, particularly for their practical enforcement, has been very much emphasized. So we can see from this round of National People's Congress, amending Constitution is a big step to making the Constitution more practical and functionable in the society, within the government.
Just to follow on the process, I mean, again, you know, it has the getting rid of the term limits, for example. That's been a huge thing in the West. But I mean, it also shows that.
And you don't think it should be?
No, I don't. I think it's a thoughtful process about stability. Okay, so I mean, at this point in time, and this was effective before, but is chairman of the Communist Party, as the head of the military commission, he could have those for a longer period of time.
There's consistency there,
yes,
because the head of state and the commander-in-chief and also the CPC general secretary should fall on the same person. That has been established practice.
Absolutely.
If there is no term limits for the other two, there shouldn't be a term limit for the head of state.
Precisely, and so that's where I think that there's a consistency here, and I think that the West has a tendency sometimes to look at it backwards, like it's going to become something that's not good, but it's actually quite positive.
What they don't buy is that there is no term limits doesn't mean that's life term for anybody.
Well, interestingly enough, the United States didn't have any term limits for the President of the United States, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected 4 times, and in 1947, then they changed it. They said, hey, George Washington himself only went for 2 terms. But what I'm saying is that this is a fluid it's a fluid indirect democracy of sorts, and it's actually been held through the National People's Congress. And it's done by consensus. And when I hear, and I kind of ruffle when I hear this rubber stamp policy, because it's really been vetted and been worked out over a long period of time, and they have academics like Professor Wong here that are contributing to these things, and they're open to the public, generally speaking.
But one thing they blame that the Chinese parliament is a rubber stamp is that there is a high rate of approval because there are some votes of against, but most of the votes are for the legislations that are on the table.
Yeah, but okay, I agree with you there. I mean, it's been thought out by consensus about what's going to be proposed, and I think that's one thing. The second thing is that
because the process of proposal already has some elements of different ideas.
Same like in the United States. A lot of, and I think Americans forget about this. We have 200 amendments every single year made to the United States Constitution, just so you know. The last one, there's 33 of them, and I just tell you, the last one was proposed in 1789, approved in 1991. Took them 202 years. So, I mean, I know your typical average American doesn't understand this. I mean, I happen to be in law, but you know, amendments do happen. They are proposed. You know, what didn't pass is women's rights in the United States, the ratification. So, I mean, let's not wag fingers in any direction until we figure out what works for that particular time and that particular society. At one point in time, we had an amendment that prohibited alcohol. Then that was repealed as well. And so, you know, it's really easy for us, you know, to say that, and this is where I think...
So you're basically saying don't be judgmental on the other systems.
Right.
Because they have their own context.
Exactly. And I think in the United States, the Constitution, everyone knows, you know, 1789, that was written, and then they made 10 amendments. Those are the Bill of Rights. And then there's 33 different ones altogether. And there's approximation. You can either get the states' rights to approve, or you can get done in both houses of Parliament, of Congress. But it also, the Constitution emanates from the Magna Carta. I mean, it emanates from the Magna Carta, which is, again, a common law precept. And this has been different. This doesn't have case law or stare decisis, as we call it. So this is where I think people get confused. And I'll just explain what stare decisis is for a second. So when there is something like gay marriage, which is approved in the United States, it's made by law, by cases, by the United States Supreme Court. I mean, there's like 390 Supreme Court justices in China. They're not necessarily appealing on...
So there's an efficiency problem there, you're saying?
Well, I mean, maybe it's more efficient with regard to 390, perhaps. But I'm saying, you know, there's 120,000 judges. And there was, you know, just so everyone knows, there was some retraction in the number of judges. And you can say, whoa, that doesn't look good. The fact is it's actually good, because a lot of these judges, and we've been a part of trying to understand them, which is, didn't have legal education or training. And so I think that you're getting a higher level. And we've only got 300,000 lawyers to facilitate what is going on in the ground. So, you know, it's one of these things where if they had let this be 100 as a rule by law, where lawyers are going to be handling every single case, writes a lawyer for everything.
But this is basically providing a legislative framework for China is going to do. But people are wondering, you have this foundation, where your country is headed. Okay, we have a live feed already from the NPC, because the NPC will have this Congress briefing from the Legislative Affairs Committee.
好，谢谢，谢谢。各位记者朋友，大家下午好，欢迎参加13届全国人大1次会议记者会。本场记者会是宪法修正案专题记者会。我们很高兴地邀请到13届全国人大1次会议秘书处法案组组长、全国人大常委会法制工作委员会主任沈春耀先生。
of the Legislative Affairs Commission of the National People's Congress Standing Committee to take your questions on the draft amendments to the Constitution. Some opening remarks first from Mr. Shen. Friends from the press, good afternoon. Welcome to today's press conference. This afternoon, the first session of the 13th MPC convened the third plenary session. We conducted anonymous voting and adopted the draft amendments to the Constitution of the PRC. We witnessed a very important period of time in China's history. At 15:52, the host announced that the Constitution amendments were adopted. The Presidium of the first session of the 13th National People's Congress today published the circular of the National People's Congress announcing the implementation and adoption of the constitutional amendments. The Constitution is the fundamental law of the country, and it is the overarching charter of our country and party, and it reflects the will of the people. Constitutional amendments are very important to our political life. It benefits the country and also our people. In a new era for the development of socialism with Chinese characteristics, constitutional amendments represent important progress in our legal development. It is also a very important product of the first session of the 13th National People's Congress, which is the first item on the agenda. So it's a very important occasion, which is reason for celebration. I congratulate every one of us who is involved in this process. This time around, the constitutional amendments are made in strict accordance with legal procedures. Let me briefly touch upon the issues discussed and deliberated at today's meeting. On March the 5th, the meeting listened to the report of Wang Chen, Deputy Chairman of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, on behalf of the 12th National People's Congress Standing Committee. He explained the details about the constitutional amendments based on a program of the two sessions. On March the 7th, in both morning and the afternoon, different delegations convened plenary sessions and breakout sessions, deliberating the constitutional amendments draft. Altogether, over 2,400 deputies attended the plenary session and the breakout sessions and raised their proposals and suggestions. On March the 8th in the afternoon, at the plenary session of the Presidium of the National People's Congress Standing Committee, we listened to the report of the Secretariat on the draft amendments of the Constitution. A report of the Presidium on the constitutional amendments were presented. On March the 9th, in the morning session, different delegations deliberated the draft of the constitutional amendments. On March the 10th, in the afternoon session, the Presidium, the chairperson, and also other participants convened a very important meeting, listening to the report of the Secretariat on the explanations on the draft amendments to the Constitution. And important suggestions were also raised at the meeting, and the decisions were put to the deliberation of the delegations. In the morning of today, March the 11th, the delegations, based on the deliberations of different delegations, submitted the deliberations to voting. And this afternoon, you may have seen that the draft amendments have been adopted and widely reported, and it has been made in strict accordance with laws, and over 200 people have been involved in supervising the voting process. And it is an anonymous voting procedure, and every deputy has a ballot to cast in this process. And they can vote in favor or against, or they can also abstain from the voting process. And it is done in strict accordance with legal procedures. As a result, the constitutional amendments, according to voting, won a landslide approval. As a deputy of the 13th National People's Congress and also a member of the Secretariat, I'm very gratified and happy with this result. This time around, in the constitutional amendments, the principal purpose of making this amendment is to write the important philosophies and concepts of the 19th CPC Congress into the Constitution. Especially Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. And it has been written into the fundamental law of China. That demonstrates the new results, new progress, new experience, new requirements of our socioeconomic development. In maintaining the continuity, stability, and authority of the Constitution, we continue to promote the progress of the Constitution and improvement of the Constitution in line with the times. The just adopted constitutional amendments include altogether 21 articles. And they mainly cover the following areas. First, it has established the scientific outlook on development, Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, as a very important guideline for our social and political life. And they represent the new results of our guiding principles. Secondly, we revised and improved the overall structure and deployment for socialism with Chinese characteristics, and also the objectives for the second centennial goal of our country's development. Thirdly, we improved the law-based governance and the implementation of the Constitution and relevant provisions and articles. Fourthly, we enriched and substantiated and revised the contents relating to the revolution and construction and development of our country. Fifth, we revised and improved the united front with patriotism at the core and also the relations with democratic parties. Sixth, we revised and improved the articles relating to peaceful foreign relations and major arrangements for foreign relations. I have seen some foreign journalists here present at this press conference, and they mentioned, and in the amendments it was proposed that we will uphold peaceful development, mutually beneficial strategy of opening up, and promote the building of a community with shared future for mankind. So this is the sixth revision. Seventh, we substantiated and strengthened the leadership of the Communist Party of China and relevant provisions. Eighth, we added core socialist values and relevant contents into the Constitution. Ninth, we revised and improved the provisions relating to the term of office of Chinese president and vice president. 10th, in the Constitution, we added the legislative power for more cities with subsidiary districts. 10th, we continue to deepen supervisory commissions in response to the new developments in our country and relevant provisions and articles, which means we will add relevant provisions relating to supervisory commissions. And there are quite a number of articles and also a section devoted to supervisory commissions. And in 11 points, in 10 articles, relevant provisions were provided for regarding supervisory commissions. Lastly, we also revised and improved the provisions regarding special committees of the National People's Congress Standing Committee. We believe that constitutional amendments and the adoption of the draft amendments to the Constitution will be bound to promote and safeguard the development of the party and the country and contribute significantly to reinforcing the legal development of our country. So this is pretty much what I would like to say in the opening remarks. Now I would like to give my mic to my colleagues.
Now the floor is open to questions.
中区第3排这位男士。
谢谢主持人，我是人民日报的记者。刚刚审议通过的宪法修正案明确了习近平新时代中国特色社会主义思想在国家政治和社会生活中的指导地位。请问我们该如何理解把中国共产党的这一指导思想载入国家根本法？它具有什么样的现实意义和历史意义？谢谢。
I'm with People's Daily. The just adopted amendment to the Constitution has established the Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era as one of the guidelines for the country's political and social life. So what is the relevance and historical significance of incorporating the CPC's guiding thought into the basic law of the state?
这次修改宪法的这个一个重要的内容呢，就是把习近平新时代中国特色社会主义思想载入国家根本法。
To write the Xi Jinping thoughts on social and Chinese characteristics for new era into the country's fundamental law. It's a common wish of the party members as well as Chinese people. Since the 18th CPC National Congress, the Central Party Committee, with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core, continue to strengthen the work of building socialism with Chinese characteristics and ushered in a new era for a development for the new era and forming a series of new concepts, new thoughts, and new strategies in governing the country. During the 19th CPC National Congress has established the Central Party Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core and have concluded all of these theories and thoughts and has been written into the party charter. The guiding principle of the party has been updated in a timely fashion. One of the features of China's constitution is that it clearly stipulated that the guiding thoughts of the country's governance is clearly stipulated, and it's clearly said that it's Marxism-Leninism, the Mao Deng thought, and Deng Xiaoping theory. And three represents. That is before this constitutional amendment. This time we also added the scientific outlook on development and Xi Jinping thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristic for a new era. Indeed, Xi Jinping thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristic for a new era is a new, latest result of Marxism with Chinese characteristics, and it's a combination of the CPC's wisdom and our practices. And since the 18th CPC National Congress, we've made historical breakthroughs, both in the party as well as in the country, and historical breakthroughs have been witnessed. And its political significance, theoretical significance, and practical significance reached wide and high consensus both in the party and in the entire country as a whole. Therefore, to establish this Xi Jinping thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristic for a new era as a guiding thought, it demonstrated the features of the Constitution, and it's also an important experiences of the development of constitutions. If you're familiarized with the constitutions, we made several amendments, and there are similar amendments in the past times. There is very rich content to Xi Jinping thoughts on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. While in the 19th CPC Congress, there is a more systematic description, and it clearly stipulated our major missions of building a moderately prosperous society, and the two-step objectives of building China into a strong country that is beautiful, strong, and democratic and environmentally friendly. So our major contradiction is the ever-growing demand of a better life and an imbalanced development within the country. So we need to be more people-oriented and promote full-fledged development of the people in order to reach common prosperity. It also has clear provision of the four fronts, and to strengthen confidence in this path, system, the institution and culture and theories. And the goal of deepening reform is to optimize the governing system and modernization of governing, and promote the rule of law, and build a legislative system with Chinese socialism. The aim of military building is to build a army that is world first class and listen to the command of the party. The aim of building the diplomacy of China is to build a community with shared future for mankind, and this clearly stipulated the leadership of the CPC is the most fundamental feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics, as well as the advantages of socialism with Chinese characteristics. It also pinpoints the requirement for a new time, and political building has now a central position in China's political life. If you are familiarized with Xi Jinping's thoughts on socialism with the Chinese characteristics for a new era, you may see that it is demonstrated and depicted in various parts of the amendment.
谢谢。
Thank
请继
you.
续提问。右区第5排那位女士。
好，谢谢主持人，我是中央人民广播电台和央广网的记者。那宪法修正案呢，是在第1章的总纲的第1条当中呢，增加了中国共产党领导是中国特色社会主义最本质的特征。那我注意到，在现行的宪法当中呢，只是在序言部分有中国共产党，还有中国共产党领导这样的表述。那请问这次为什么要在正文当中增加相关的规定呢？谢谢。
I'm with China National Radio. In the amendment to the Constitution, a new sentence is added to Article 1 of the Constitution's first chapter, General Principles, which reads, "The leadership of the Communist Party of China is the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics." Now, we have noticed that in the previous edition of the Constitution, phrases of Communist Party of China and the leadership of the CPC only appeared in the preamble. So why this time new provisions have been adopted to make reference to CPC and the CPC leadership in the main body of the Constitution?
中国共产党的领导
The CPC leadership is the choice of the history and our people. The CPC leaders have on many occasions systematically and comprehensively elaborated on this point. This time in the constitutional amendments, as you mentioned just now, many people have also taken note of this particular fact. In the articles of the Constitution and also the general provisions of the first article, we added the following sentence. The leadership of the CPC is the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics. As you mentioned in your question, in a previous edition, in the Constitution, the CPC leadership is clearly stipulated, and this remains consistent this time around, but it was written in the preamble of the Constitution of the previous edition. The key feature of Chinese Constitution is that it has a very important section That is the preamble of the Constitution, and it has altogether 13 paragraphs. Writing CPC leadership into the preamble, and also it has been mentioned 5 times in the preamble, and it is a very clear wording. Well, there is no problem with the effectiveness and validity of the preamble. So this is the first point I would like to emphasize. In addition, why do we write this sentence into the first article of the Constitution that reads, the leadership of the Communist Party of China is the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics? I think on top of the previous edition, this reinforces and expands the definition, and it has significance on the following 3 fronts. First, it fully demonstrates the ultimate leadership of the CPC. If you read closely the first article of the Constitution, it has provisions about the fundamental system of the country, that is the political system based on workers' democratic dictatorship and alliance between workers and farmers. So this is written into the first part of the Article 1. Socialism is the defining system of the Chinese country, and it is also written into the article. The revision this time demonstrates the ultimate authority and leadership of the CPC. Secondly, it testifies to the comprehensive leadership of the CPC. The first article of the Constitution is an overarching and general article concerning the fundamental system and political institutions of the country. So the CPC leadership is manifested in every part of our daily life. In the 19th Party Congress, General Secretary Xi Jinping mentioned a very important sentence, that is, the CPC has the ultimate leadership over all aspects of our political and social life, which means we have to follow the comprehensive leadership of the CPC. Thirdly, it reflects the fact that the CPC is progressing with the times. The CPC leadership is the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that changing the CPC leadership from the preamble into the main body of the Constitution demonstrates the fact that socialism with Chinese characteristics has been for the first time written into the Constitution. In the Constitution, there are many provisions about socialism, but the defining feature is the leadership of the CPC, and that speaks to the progress of the CPC in step with the times, and it reinforces, deepens, and expands the significance of the CPC leadership, and it has special political and legal relevance and significance. Well, in your question, you mentioned a word that needs to be clarified. The CPC leadership is written for the first time into the main body of the Constitution, but to me, the preamble is also the main body of the Constitution, and the articles are naturally the main body of the Constitution. So in legal vernacular, we would treat all these into the main body, and we have different chapters and sections concerning the fundamental political systems of the country. So this revision is a very important part of this amendment, and it demonstrates the ultimate comprehensive and progress of the CPC leadership. Thank you.
西区后面的那位外国记者，举手的那位。
你好，我是美国全国公共广播电台的记者。有一种观点认为，中国共产党要活动在法治的、法律的框架之内，因此呢，党章要服从于宪法，因此呢，不是总统的任期制要从那个宪法拿出来，而是党的总书记的任期限制应该写进党章。您对这种评论有什么评论？I'm with National Public Radio, and I think your translator is doing a lovely job. But as I'm a bit picky about my words, I'm going to translate that myself. And I'm talking about a particular criticism which says that the party, by its own admission, must operate within the confines of Chinese law. And that means that the Constitution is superior to the party's charter. And therefore, it's not presidential term limits which should be erased from the Constitution, but instead limits on the term of the party's general secretary, which should be written into the party's charter. How do you respond to that argument? Thank you.
他自己翻译一遍，就是中英文是一样的。
他的英文更好一些，中文呢我听得模糊一点对不起啊，我努力理解吧。你刚才的中文这个问题啊，党的18大以来呢，习近平总书记、党中央多次的强调。
After the 18th National Congress of the CPC reinstated that we need to rule the country according to the Constitution and the ruling according to the based of according to the law. But the Constitution, in promoting the rule of law, has a irreplaceable function and position. Since reform and opening up, and we enter into a new historical period, this fact is deeply felt by all the Chinese people. The Central Party Committee has stressed on many occasions one fundamental stand of us, that is, the party leads the people to make the Constitution, including making amendment to the Constitution. The party leads the people to implement and execute the Constitution. And the party itself need to act within the confine of the Constitution. This is not only mentioned today, it has already been written into the party charter. I mean, the latest amendment during the 19th CPC National Congress. This principle, the party have to act within the confinement of the Constitution, is written in 35 years ago during the 12th CPC National Congress. That is 35 years ago. So whether it's Constitution or law, the CPC and organization of all levels and governing organs, as well as leaders and staff at all levels, have to follow this important principle and safeguard this principle. And after the 18th CPC National Congress, in protecting the authority of the Constitution, we've adopted many important measures. After the approval of the draft amendment, in the report of Comrade Zheng of the work of the Standing Committee, he also mentioned this important content. And a big part of this work of the Standing Committee is about the implementation of the Constitution. In 2014, for example, we have established 4 days, identified 4 days as National Constitution Day. There's also a oath of allegiance, which is according to the proposal of 2015 NPC Standing Committee, proposing that all state functionaries shall take public oath of allegiance to the Constitution when assuming office. It has been included in the latest constitutional amendment. Our spokesperson of the session also mentioned that one of the major items on the agenda is to elect the new cabinet and party leadership. One important stipulation is that when the officials assume office, they have to pledge allegiance to the Constitution right here at the Great Hall of the People. This is an entirely new stipulation for us to have a pledging of allegiance to the Constitution here in the Great Hall of the People. These are major issues in our legislative and legal life, and they are of great significance. There were in the past corruption when it comes to election or in Liaoning province. And also the law on the national anthem and other relevant laws have been constantly established. So according to the Constitution, we've handled many major issues in our political life and accumulated new practical experiences. Under the party leadership, we need to stick to the rule of law and the rule according to the Constitution. And the ruling and governing according to the law and Constitution, there are no contradictions or questions to it. And we are enriching and interpreting the rule of law and rule of Constitution with practical experiences. According to, I read a piece of news on yesterday's newspaper, according to which General Secretary Xi Jinping participated in a discussion of the Chongqing delegates, giving important comments and opinions. General Secretary Xi Jinping, according to the report, when speaking to leaders of all levels, give clear requirements, stick to the rule of law, and is against the rule of individual persons. We need to stay all to the laws and the constitutions and pay a leading role of act within the confinement of the Constitution. These are quite clear words that is made by General Secretary Xi Jinping in his speech. And that would be my answer to your question.
继续提问。中区第4排的靠过道的那位男士，这边，你是左手边。
好，谢谢主持人，我是中央电视台、央视网、央视新闻移动网的记者。我们发现这次宪法的修改所占篇幅最大的内容就是宪法的第3章，国家机构中新增了监察委员会，这一节。那么也对其余的10条都进行了相应的修改。那么我想问的是，这样的修改对于我们国家反腐败工作有着怎样的意义？谢谢。
I'm with CCTV. We've noticed that the most substantial revision to the Constitution this time is in Chapter 3, the structure of the state. A new section titled the Supervisory Commission has been inserted, and also corresponding revisions have been made to the other 10 articles. So what is the significance of the revision to anti-corruption work?
So I would like to take your question, and Mr. Shen would take a few minutes of break. Thank you for your question, and thank you for taking note of the revisions to the articles relating to supervisory commissions. There are quite a number of articles being revised. This time around, the CPC Central Committee decided to revise the constitutions, mainly to deepen the supervisory mechanisms and institutions. Just now you mentioned that in 21 amendments, a total of 11 amendments relate to the supervisory mechanisms and commissions. In 11 points of the 10 articles in the Constitution, and also in the chapter titled The Structure of the State, a part entitled Supervisory Commissions is inserted. So that occupies a significant part of the amendments to the Constitution this time. And that demonstrates the significance of the Supervisory Commission. Deepening supervisory mechanisms is a very comprehensive and significant decision by the CPC Central Committee. The goal of the reform is to integrate the anti-graft resources and capabilities and strengthen the united and centralized leadership of the CPC over anti-graft campaigns and establish efficient supervisory mechanisms at the national level. And a very important task is to establish supervisory commissions. Establishing supervisory commissions concerns the revision and adaptation and adjustments of the state functionaries at the top level. And that's why we have to make the relevant stipulations and amendments to the constitutions. The organization, composition, and also the functions and powers of the supervisory commissions and its relationship with other state bodies are clearly stipulated into the constitutions. Let me briefly touch upon the main revisions. Regarding the establishment of the supervisory commissions, in Article 3 of the Constitution, we added the sentence that the supervisory commissions will be created by the National People's Congress and will be put under the oversight of the National People's Congress. Second, regarding the appointment and removal of the supervisory commission members, in Article 26, we added the sentence that electing the director of the supervisory commissions in other articles, we also added provisions regarding the appointment of the deputy directors and members of the supervisory commission. So these are the appointments and removal of the directors and the deputy directors. We also added that article regarding the terms of office of the directors and deputy directors of the Supervisory Commission. The term of office will be the same as the People's Congress of the same level, and they will serve no more than 2 consecutive terms. In terms of the leadership institutions and arrangements, the National Supervisory Commission will be the highest body of supervision, and it will be responsible for leading the lower supervisory commissions, and the lower supervisory commissions will answer to the supervisory commissions at the upper level. Regarding the relationship between the supervisory commissions and other state bodies, we provided for the fact that in dealing with corruption and occupational and professional crimes, the supervisory commissions have to work with other state bodies under checks and balances and other mechanisms. The provisions of the supervisory commissions and relevant institutions have provided constitutional foundation for the exercise of powers by the supervisory commissions. You know that according to the program, we also have the review of the supervisory law and regulations. So these provisions will continue to promote the establishment of a clean government and the undertaking of anti-graft and corruption campaigns. Thank you.
谢谢，请继续提问。西区第3排这位女士，第3排。
感谢主持人，我是新京报的记者。关于国家主席、副主席任职规定的修改呢，是这次宪法修改引人关注的一个地方。我们想了解一下呢，就是删去国家主席、副主席连续任职不得超过2届的规定，是有怎么样的考虑？今后，国家机关的其他国家领导人员有没有类似的修改考虑？谢谢。
With the Beijing news, the revision to the term of office of the president and the vice president is one of the parts that has drawn most attention in the constitutional revision this time. So what are the considerations behind deleting the provision that the president and the vice president of the PRC shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms? Will there be similar revisions to other leadership positions of state organs in the future?
这次宪法修正案的一个重要内容呢，就是对现行宪法的第79条第3款的规定呢做出修改完善。79条第3款的规定呢，是中华人民共和国主席、副主席以及任期
said that the term office of the President and Vice President of the People's Republic of China is the same as that of the National People's Congress.
对吧？第2句话，原来有这样一句话。
And that they shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms.
这次修改呢，把后面这句话
According to the latest amendment, the second sentence was removed.
应该说是
That is the removal of the they shall serve no more than 2 consecutive terms. It includes important consideration and is highly significant. According to Mr. Wang Chen's interpretation of the amendment draft, he has made clear explanation that, especially about the removal of term limit for president and vice president. Both in and out of the party and across the entire country, there had been opinions, especially during the forming of the 19th CPC National Congress report. There are opinions, widespread opinions, that in the party's charter, there are stipulations about the terms of the General Secretary of the CPC. And There are also stipulations about terms of the Central Military Committee.
那么中华人民共和国宪法关于国家
But in the Constitution,
主席
there are
任职任期的规定
about the term limit of
连续任职不得超过
military the
因此呢
military commission
许多
or the
单位和同志呢提出
there is no stipulation about the term limit about of the military commission in the Constitution. Therefore, there are party members and comrades propose that the Constitution should have this same stipulation.
这个最高领导职务
The highest leader of the party central committee, the highest leader of the military commission, and the highest leader of the country, that is the president, should have the same stipulation on their term limits. For CPC, which is a big party leading a big country, it is not only necessary but most appropriate. This kind of leading structure
从长期执政实践中
is an important conclusion and discovery through long terms of governance and ruling of the country, and this is considered a successful experiences of the past. If you look back at the history of China, more than 68 years, there are many different stipulations when it comes to the leading force of the country, but in the recent 20 years, especially after the year 1993, this political system has been proven effective. Therefore, this amendment to the Article 98 and Clause 3 aims at optimizing the leading structure of the country, and this amendment will help safeguarding the authority of Central Party Committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core. It can also optimize the leading system for the party and the country, and it is beneficial to the stability and safety of the entire country. Therefore, this particular content in the amendment has raised public attention. I believe that it's quite reasonable, and this important amendment needs to be fully understood. And to correctly understand the significance of the removal of term limits for President and Vice President.
谢谢主持人。中国国际广播电台记者提问。那么就是我们注意到，这次宪法修正案第40条对宪法宣誓做出了相关的规定，而此前全国人大常委会是已经就此做出了相关的决定。在这种情况下，为什么这次宪法还要增加有关宪法宣誓的这样一个内容呢？谢谢。
I'm with China Radio International. Article 40 of the amendment to the Constitution has introduced a new paragraph regarding the oath of allegiance to the Constitution. But actually before that, the MPC Standing Committee had already issued a decision on the constitutional oath. So why still including this provision in the constitutional amendment?
Implementing the oath of allegiance to the Constitution is the very important decision of the fourth plenary session of the 18th National People's Congress Standing Committee that aims to promote the awareness of the general public in observing and implementing the Constitution. And by doing so, we can make sure that the authority of the Constitution can be respected. And the fourth plenum of the 18th CPC Central Committee, that was raised as a very important decision. In 2015, the National People's Congress Standing Committee, through legal procedure, made it into the law as a very important decision. Over the past 2 years, state organs at different levels and the state functionaries of different agencies have taken a public oath of allegiance to the Constitution when assuming office, including the state staff elected by the National People's Congress Standing Committee, and also the staff of the State Council, the Supreme People's Court and Supreme People's Procuratorate. And the National People's Congress Standing Committee has also implemented the oath of allegiance to the Constitution starting from January the 1st, 2016. Altogether, we hosted 12 sessions of pledging allegiance involving 45 people, and this is a very meaningful work. Last year, when elected as the director of the Legislative Affairs Commission of the NPC Standing Committee, I also took a public oath of allegiance, and I was very proud. At the first session of the 13th National People's Congress, there is on the agenda item that is taking a public oath of allegiance to the Constitution at the National People's Congress sessions. And the Central Committee of the CPC and the central government takes this very seriously, and relevant agencies have been following this over the years. Madam Zheng also mentioned that the supervisory commissions, when piloted in different localities, have also implemented the taking of public oath of allegiance to the Constitution when electing the relevant members of the commissions. In Article 27, we added a paragraph on this particular topic, which aims to reinforce and elevate the significance of the oath of allegiance. And that also has to do with the significance of the Constitution as a very fundamental piece of law. So for the highest state leaders and the officials at different levels, when assuming office, they all have to, in accordance with the law, take a public oath of allegiance to the Constitution. Not long ago, the NPC Standing Committee chairman and the relevant members revised the relevant provisions. The oath is a very sacred part of taking office, and that represents the commitments and promise to our people. So we revised the oath in order to keep up with the times. At the 19th Party Congress, we proposed the new goals for our country, and the constitutional amendments also incorporated the new goals. That is to build our country into a prosperous, democratic, civilized, harmonious, and beautiful country with modern systems and socialism with Chinese characteristics. A modern socialist country that is prosperous and strong is the aspiration and dream of every one of Chinese people. We have been striving towards this goal for a long time, and we have embarked on a long journey. Today, we're getting closer to achieving this goal. General Secretary Xi Jinping mentioned the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is a very important goal, and we are more closer to this goal than ever, and we revised the oath in this particular context. And that's why we reinforced and expanded the relevant provisions regarding the oath of allegiance in this particular context. And I believe that this will contribute to the implementation of the Constitution and in carrying forward the spirit of the constitutional constitution, and also in promoting the implementation of the constitutional provisions. We have numerous officials at different levels, and they will take the public oath of allegiance to the Constitution when assuming office. Thank you.
中区第4排那位外国记者。
Thank you. With Reuters, there's been a lot of criticism of this decision to scrap the term limits. A lot of fears about the possibility of a return to one-man rule. Some people even worry that political struggle within China might return to the period of the Cultural Revolution, or that when Xi does eventually decide to step down, there's going to be a power struggle. How can you say that these sorts of issues won't arise? Thank you.
你好，我是路透社的记者。那么，对于这次修宪当中呢，关于领导人任期限制的取消，也有一些不同的意见。他们认为呢，这会导致强势的领导的出现，而且会使得中国再次出现过去曾经经历过的政治动荡，而且在领导人换届的时候呢，也会可能出现一些权力斗争。那么，如果这些现象出现的话，应当如何应对？
还是关于79条第3款的规定啊，因为我觉得刚才
This is still a question about Article 79 and Clause 3. This is an important measure for prioritizing the leading structure. There's coordinates between the party, the military, and the country. It is true to our national reality, and is also experiences draw from practices and explorations, both in and out of the party and across the entire country. We have reached a high level of consensus.
可能有好多记者、媒体朋友们，第一天的3月5号。 3月5号的那天开幕会，除了总理做报告以外，
I don't know if you listened to Mr. Wang Chen's interpretation report on the amendment draft to their constitution. Legal interpretation
就是不会啊，这个有什么波澜和这个。
is more than often just a written, a regular interpretation. But when talking about this issue, there were 2 applauses given to this amendment draft. So without clear political support from the society and support of the current legal system, this will not happen. Therefore, I don't think there is a problem or a question to this amendment draft. Your speculations actually have no base of existence.
习近平总书记在19届中央政治局常委。
According to General Xi Jinping's speech, he mentioned once that practical experiences have shown that the CPC has the ability to lead the social revolution and lead the people to go through a self-revolution. Which party in the world can claim that they are able to conduct a self-revolution? I want to draw your attention to these two important revolutions. The CPC was established 90 years ago. We've encountered countless obstacles, addressed major issues and conundrums. And they include and healthy rotation of leadership at all levels in order to maintain the vitality and stability of the country. After 40 years of reform and opening up, we have successfully expanded and ushered in a new path for socialism with Chinese characteristics. We believe that in the future we'll continue with this path and to expand this path and to discover even brighter future. And our objectives is still to be realized. I do think that your speculation is ungrounded and without a base.
中区第6排的第2位那个女士来。
谢谢主持人。封面新闻记者提问：我们注意到，新通过的宪法修正案和之前的草案相比，新增加了一个内容，那就是将全国人大法律委员会更名为全国人大宪法和法律委员会。所以想请问，首先这一修改是出于什么样的考虑？中国有建宪法法院或其他专门的宪法审查机构的打算吗？全国人大如何推进合宪性审查？谢谢。
I'm with the cover. We have noticed that compared to the draft amendment, there's one further revision in the newly adopted amendment, that is the MPC Law Committee has been renamed into the MPC Constitution and Law Committee. So what is the purpose of this revision? Does China have any plan to set up a constitutional court or other constitutional review bodies? What will the MPC do to advance constitutionality review?
As you mentioned in the question, very specifically, at the first session of the 13th National People's Congress Standing Committee, when deliberating the draft amendments, according to the suggestions of the deputies and also the feedback from different delegations, we responded actively to the explanations of Mr. Wang Chen on constitutional amendments. In the latter part of his explanations, he mentioned one point. At the third plenary session of the 19th CPC Central Committee, we adopted a plan to deepen the reform of the national institutions, that is, changing the MPC Law Committee into the MPC Constitution and Law Committee. So the constitutional amendments were done strictly based on the law, and it is not done very lightly. It represents a response to the suggestions and voices of the deputies, and it is considered a very significant step. And it actually demonstrates the spirits of the 19th Party Congress, which raised the suggestions on improving constitutional review and respecting the authority of the Constitution. And it is beneficial to improving the MPC Law Committee. In item 1 of Article 70 of the Constitution, there are also relevant provisions. This will also reinforce and promote the implementation and supervision of the constitutional work. So based on discussions and strict legal procedures, the Secretariat of the conference and the Presidium of the two sessions listened to different rounds of reports. That's why the draft amendments were revised, and this is a highly significant step. In terms of constitutional supervision, I would like to make the following briefings. According to the provisions of the Constitution, the National People's Congress is responsible for revising the Constitution. That's what we did exactly today. It will also be responsible for the implementation and execution of the Constitution. The NPC Standing Committee, which is quite different from the NPC itself, is responsible for interpreting the Constitution. It is also responsible for supervising the implementation and execution of the Constitution. So these are two very important organs. In revising Item 1 of Article 70 of the Constitution, we changed NPC Law Committee into the Constitution and Law Committee of the National People's Congress. So, at the specialized committee of the NPC level, for the first time, we have the Constitution Committee. It reinforces the work of the NPC in the area of the Constitution. Constitutional work involves supervision, interpretation, implementation and execution of the Constitution, and we have established a whole set of legal systems based on the constitutional work. And the important aim is to promote the implementation, supervision, and interpretation of the Constitution, including constitutional review, as you mentioned in your question. This is a new requirement of the 19th Party Congress. We also had provisions regarding the publicity of the Constitution. So every part of the constitutional work is covered and reinforced through this revision. So that's why we made some minor modifications to Article 70, which has not been revised for a long time. At the first session of the 13th National People's Congress, when there is a succession of the new deputies, we would have some decisions regarding the establishment of specialized committees. And there are also provisions regarding other specialized committees, but this time around you raised the Constitutional Committee, and by doing so we try to improve the organization and setup of specialized committees in order to reinforce rule of law, legal work, and also relevant constitutional work. Thank you.
由于时间关系，再回答一个问题。
There's one more question. Well, that's the press conference from the Legislative Affairs Commission, from the NPC Standing Committee, and Mr. Chunyao, the chairman of the Legislative Affairs Commission of the NPC Standing Committee, and also Deputy Secretary Ms. Zheng Shuna, answering some questions from the journalist on the amendment of the Constitution itself. And now for some insights, we're now joined by our own commentator, Robert Lawrence Kuhn. Dr. Kuhn, so you've been listening to the press conference from the NPC's Legislative Affairs Commission. What do you make of the exchange between the legislators and the press about the amendment of the Constitution?
It's been an issue that obviously has worldwide attention as well as here in China.
The core idea is the strengthening of the Chinese system of governance. That comes through loud and clear. Then we look at how that is decomposed into its various parts. Certainly the leadership of the party in terms of the party leading the country is re-emphasized in the amendment, as well as the fact that the Communist Party of China is the ruling party is the defining feature of socialism with Chinese characteristics, a very important formulation. So, and each of the items in the amendment, you can see reinforcing this concept of strengthening governance, making the country more stable, more able to deal with the issues in the new era, which is a time of much greater complexity in economic, social, and on the international scene. So this is a tightening of the ship in order to sail forward into the new era.
And according to some of the MPC legislators, the amendment is for stability and also stability of the system. But there are questions from NPR and Reuters about whether China can deliver with this political stability in the future. What do you say to that?
Well, in today's world, everything is so interconnected that you cannot avoid dealing with scenarios that have exogenous or external perturbations that affect you. We saw that in the Asian financial crisis in the late 1990s, 2008 and 2009, in the world financial crisis. You know, we have to expect different things, and because China is such a large country and has grown so fast and still has significant problems, as we know, with social imbalances economically, geographically, with pollution being very serious, the three big battles, financial risk, pollution, and poverty for the next few years. You have to have a strong system in order to deal with it. And so we can look at each of the parts, including the removal of term limits, is all part of the same picture.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Kyun, for your analysis and insights. And now let's turn to our studio discussions. We have Mr. Wang and also Edward here in our studio. Well, the constitutional amendment is basically to provide institutional guarantee for China's future agenda. Many people say China's still got to carry on reform and opening up. Do you think this is basically an institutional guarantee for China to deliver on those reform targets as we promised?
I do, and simply because China has unfolding reform going on, and also their particular targets have been set up already, and so-called, two are bicentennial goals, and one is at the time of 100 years anniversary of the founding of PRC, excuse me, of
the CPC, 1921.
The party, and also the founding of PRC, so that's
that will 249.
So all the plans has been carefully designed and laid out, and therefore in order to make institutional protection or guarantee for realizing all these goals, certainly, and China needs a stable leadership and also a stable or continuity of the policy. So in this regard, I think these amendments to the Constitution will play a significant role and greater impact on the future.
And Edward?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree. I mean, here we've got a guy who's been tested with the metal. I mean, meaning that he's run two provinces that are more than 100 million persons each. Okay?
You mean Mr. Xi?
That's correct. I mean, in talking about the term limits, and that was the question by NPR. It was sort of a so-called gotcha moment that got missed. And the idea, I look at Einstein, and he said you can't use, previous thinking to be able to solve, the problems of today. And so I think that this, and the professor and I were talking while this was going on, and we were saying, China is bold with its experimentation, with trying out the system. They've set up the framework to take Professor Q, what he was just saying about a ship. This is kind of like making a better port, or making the port system adequate for ships to be able to land, and then making the bridge to the, to land with a gangplank, to using the Constitution and the laws. If you look at it, the foundational issues which they brought up in the press conference, which is they're going to have persons coming in to take a pledge in the at the National People's Congress, and they're going to, it's going to be a bunch of foundational style issues to get this through to 1/5 of the world's population. So I mean.
But the Reuters question is probably about the future. If there is going to be leader succession, will this new constitutional amendment be better or helpful for future political arrangement?
I mean, again, the future is the future, and these are these kind of traps that you get into with questions. Does anyone have any guarantees on the future of anything? I mean, the answer is no, you don't. I mean, but there's a good indication. We can look at the past, what's happened. This was brought in 1982. I'm talking about term limits, and it wasn't with the initial Constitution, and it could come back again. And there's a mechanism within the Constitution which allows you to change the Constitution. So, I mean, that should be followed.
So adaptability is a very important thing. And Mr. Shen, keep talking about the CPC has the ability to reinvent itself to adapt to the changes of the world.
That's right.
Do you think this is the basic idea why the CPC keeps saying we will double down our political system with the CPC at the leading role?
Well, if you look at the whole process of the reform in China, we can see there are constant changes, and because of the changing situation, because of the change, the new targets. But one thing needs to be kept stable, which is the general policy and the final destination and the goal of the nation, which has been firmly set up. And for different periods of time, we must accomplish different tasks. So therefore, we should have the system more adaptable to the real situation, rather than just keep the superficial structure over there without any changes, and making the social evolution or progress more difficult. And so therefore, I think on one hand, apparently rule of law need to be established and further promoted. On the other hand, rule of law doesn't mean any kind of reform or changes should be stopped or restricted. So therefore,
rather than it should be encouraged.
Therefore, we must have an institutional arrangement which encourages new ideas, new experiments, and a timely summary of the experience. So therefore, I think the Chinese system should be more adaptable, and at the same time keep the continuity for future.
Edward, there are some people talking about the ossification of a system. For example, the gun control issue in your country.
Right.
Many people say, well, the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution has been there for 200 years, but it should adapt to the changes of the time.
Sure.
So
no, I mean, but there is a mechanism in the United States Constitution. I mean, it was, again, that was written in 1789. The additional 10 are called the Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, which means that they did it in 1789, not in the
which is in that
simultaneously
context.
In that context. Yeah, I agreed. And they can change that, and we have changed it. We abolished slavery, for example. That's an amendment. We abolished drinking. Then we were like, that's not going to work out too well, and then we brought it back. But there are remember, there's 200 amendments that are made to the Constitution every single year in the United States. Most don't get out of committee. As I said before, there was one that was actually proposed.
Although probably there were political agreement, but there was still...
Sure, but I mean, there was one, like I said, in 1789, there was one to pay the Congress when they voted to raise the salary, and then it wasn't passed until 1991. It took 202 years. And so what I'm saying is it's easy for us or NPR or Reuters to say